Hello everyone. So in the last video, we ended with talking about some reproductive changes. We considered how they're different in men and for women. Something related to this today, right now, what we're going to talk about is sexuality and how that's changing. One of the things that you'll see is that once adults are middle-aged, they seem to have sexual intercourse a lot less often than when they were younger. There might be different reasons for that. One of the things that we saw last time was that hormones are changing. So for example, with women, estrogen seems to be on the decline. For men, testosterone production is on the decline, and what that can do for men is that it can make erection extremely difficult, or you need increased stimulation to have an erection. For women, this can mean vaginal dryness. It can again mean that they don't feel the need to be sexual, or they don't view themselves as sexual anymore. So obviously the psychological aspect always goes into it as well, and this is one thing that we'll look at in further detail when we also talk about the double standard of aging, which is basically that even though when we look at middle-aged adults who are middle-aged, well, even if they're men or women, they're not considered as attractive as they were when they were younger. However, women are at an increased disadvantage because both men and women seem to view middle-aged women in a much more unfavorable light than younger women. Anyway, so when we talk about sexuality, that again, what we look at is that because of the changes in hormonal levels, you're seeing a decreased sexual activity. However, one of the things that you see is that when we talk about men and we consider that they have difficulties in erection, that might be due to their hormone levels also changing. But what you see is that with increased practice, what you find is that that these problems do become better, right? So if older adults or middle-aged adults do engage in some form of sexual activity, that does mean that they're doing better. So yes, this is about sexuality. Then we consider something, when we talk about disease more broadly. So one of the things that we consider is a form of disease which becomes very prevalent in middle age is cardiovascular disease. This is much more prevalent in men than it is in women, right? When we consider leading causes of death in adults who are middle aged, right? And when we compare this, and this is statistics from the United States and Canada, and when we look at three different factors, so we look at cancer, we look at cardiovascular disease, and we look at unintentional injuries. Now, if you remember, death by unintentional injuries is a lot higher during adolescence, and that is with a particular kind of adolescent as well. But when we look at middle-aged adults, right, so what we see is that men's chances of the number of deaths per year amongst 45 to 64-year-olds, right, are highest because of cardiovascular disease amongst men, right? Whereas for women, it is actually cancer, right? In Canada, however, it's the same stat for men and women for cardiovascular disease and cancer amongst men. And for women, again, it's the cancer is the leading cause of death. Unintentional injuries are much lower in this cohort, right? So what does this tell you? That cardiovascular disease, and this can come in a lot of different forms. So what you see is that one of the leading causes of death because of cardiovascular disease seems to be heart attacks, right? So what exactly is a heart attack? Heart attack is a condition when blood supply to one part of the heart is halted, right? That can become a cause of death. Then you have another condition which is called atherosclerosis. We've talked about this earlier as well, I think, in which what happens is that there are deposits of plaque on the arteries that pump blood to the heart and take blood away from the heart. Then there's another thing which is called arrhythmia, right? So what exactly is arrhythmia? Arrhythmia is irregular heartbeat, and this can deprive again the body of oxygen if your heartbeat is irregular, and if this is again not corrected, this can result in faintness. It can result in a variety of other problems if left untreated. However, what we see is that with medicine becoming much more advanced and a lot of different solutions coming about, what we see is that there is a decrease in the number of deaths that happen due to cardiovascular disease in men, because this kind of these kind of problems, cardiovascular problems, are considered to be more prevalent in men than women. Oftentimes, one problem that you see is that women, even if they are presenting problems which might signal towards something going wrong with their cardiovascular health, these problems are usually sort of underestimated, and therefore that makes for a deferred diagnosis, which can again complicate matters. So yes, what else about cardiovascular disease? So yes, again, solutions are available now, so deaths can be controlled for. However, one of the things that you see is that when we talk about cardiovascular disease, exercise and diet are extremely important. So when we talk about atherosclerosis, right? Yes, and I was going to write diet, but I wrote stress. So again, stress again is also very important. This is something that we'll talk about when we look at this topic here, which is hostility and health. But yes, exercise and diet are extremely important when we're talking about cardiovascular health. Regular exercise is recommended for all age groups. A diet which is lower in fat, again, is higher on things like beta carotene, is higher on substances, on green vegetables, green leafy vegetables, again, can help mitigate someone's chances of developing cardiovascular disease. Anyway, we move now to the next topic which we're going to talk about, which is osteoporosis. So osteoporosis basically is a condition in which what you do is that what happens to your body is that bone mass is lost, right? And this is something that's much more prevalent in women than men, right? What you see, one of the reasons for this is that as you see estrogen levels declining, right? So it's linked to hormones. When you see estrogen levels declining, right, you also see bone mass declining, right? And because of this, what happens is that some doctors do prescribe something called hormone therapy for women, right? In which you basically have, you have this intake of estrogen. But, what you see is that even though estrogen therapy does take away the effect of something like, hot flashes, it can help build bone density and, sort of slow down this effect of bone mass being lost. However, what you see is that with hormone replacement therapy, one of the disadvantages or one of the side effects of that is that there's greater incidence of the development of cardiovascular diseases, and there could be increased risk of cancer. So, if you try to solve this through hormone replacement therapy, you are at greater risk of contracting another set of problems. However, so again, talking about osteoporosis, one of the things that you do find is that, as your bone mass begins to decline, you might experience something like a change in stature, as your spinal columns begin to sort of, there might be slips in the spinal column which bring about this change in posture. Another thing that you might notice is that, if you fall, you could be at greater risk of fractures, and fractures, at middle age, especially for older adults, can be life-threatening. So that again is there. This can be controlled for by again diet, by taking in sufficient amounts of vitamin D and calcium. But yes, osteoporosis is a problem that impacts women and men, but is much more magnified in women and can have numerous effects like body aches, like bones being becoming more brittle and therefore becoming much easier to fracture. Right. When we talk about hostility and health, so basically here what we're talking about is this type of personality which is considered the type A personality. So what exactly is the type A personality? The type A personality, and when we're talking about, so we were talking about cardiovascular disease and how that could be linked with stress as well. So this sort of ties in here. One of the things we see when we're trying to look at the correlation between cardiovascular disease and stress is a type of personality which is called the type A personality, which is marked by a high level of competition. So type A people are very competitive. They are also really sort of averse to criticism. They are extremely hostile in their dealings, and they have the sense of being pressurized for time, right? So when you sort of see that this sort of person is generally more hostile, is more prone to becoming angrier, in a variety of different situations, right? So what you see is that this pattern of behavior is it sort of can increase your chances of developing cardiovascular disease and a host of other problems as well. That could be because when you have this kind of personality or this pattern of behavior, that could have consequences with blood pressure, with how your body sort of breaks down calories, right? And that can again sort of put you at risk of contracting different diseases. Last but not the least, we talk about cancer and the development of cancer, because we saw this table as well, and we saw how cancer is again it's a significant factor when we talk about causes of death in middle-aged adults. Right. So here what you have is this image, right, which lets you compare how cancer is sort of there are different areas at which cancer attacks, or men are more likely to, let's say, develop prostate cancer, whereas women are more likely to develop breast cancer, right? So yeah, so you can go through this table. So men, again, 13% risk of lung and bronchus cancer, whereas women have a 12% risk of this. And then what you see is that you might notice some similarities. Here you have ovarian cancer as well with women. Now, why is it that with age, cancer development becomes more likely? Now, there can be multiple reasons for this. One of them is that with age, one thing that could increase is something that's called oncogenes, right? Which sort of make you more susceptible to developing these cancers. And what exactly is a cancer? A cancer is basically an abnormal growth of cells and abnormal duplication of cells, right? So oncogenes could play a part. Then you have something that are called tumor suppressant genes, right? So tumor suppressant genes, what they do is that they play their part in suppressing any kind of abnormal cell growth. But however, what you see is that with age, these become a lot less efficient. And then that can be another sort of factor that goes into it. Right, so we're talking, and then there's this other kind of mutation that can happen that goes with, something that are called stability genes, which are basically our body's sort of inner program in ensuring that, genetic mutations remain to a minimum. What are these? So what are oncogenes, tumor suppressant, genes? So basically genes that sort of come in the way of tumor suppressant genes doing their work and stability genes doing their work. So basically these genes, especially oncogenes, occur as a result of mutations, right? So basically what happens is that when a cell's genetic program is disturbed, right, that can result in a mutation, which then results in duplication of abnormal cells that crowd out normal cells, right? And so because of certain mutations, oncogenes can come about, which basically, then multiply abnormal cell growth, and then another form of gene then that suppresses the tumor suppressant genes and does not let them do their work, and then also interferes with the working of stability genes, right, which try to ensure that DNA mutation, which could be due to genetic factors, or could be the effect of a random event, or could be due to any environmental conditions, are kept to a minimum, that these are not able to control the abnormal cell mutation as well. So these are some of the reasons that cancer incidence increases during this stage. Another thing that you see is that deaths that happen due to cancer, they're not just so you don't just have this distinction of men versus women, but you also have this distinction between different ethnic groups and different SCS groups. And in the United States, what you see is that ethnic minorities that are lower down on the SCS level are much more prone to die because of having contracted cancer. And even though cancer is something that's understood to be, it's sometimes it's considered a death sentence. However, what you see is that 40% of people who do contract cancer, they do end up recovering. And those statistics obviously differ for different kinds of cancers, from where you're getting your stats from around the world. What sort of cancer is it? Mutations in themselves can be different. So you can have germline mutations, which are basically because of inherited dispositions to developing cancer, or you can have somatic mutations, which basically happen in a single cell and then multiply. So yes, this basically concludes our conversation about health and fitness in middle adulthood.